Yeah, I think.
I see.
You're live. All set.
Okay, thank you. Hi. Hello, everybody who is watching. And thank you for joining in. My name is Eva Lianne, and today we are very lucky to have many interesting people joining this live webinar, including you. You are listening into conversations of several members of the COPE working group on psychological safety, bullying, and sexual assault, sexual harassment in the maritime sector. On today's episode, we focus on honoring female mariners. Please feel welcome to leave your remarks and questions, suggestions, and experiences in the comments below so we can engage with you during the webinar. We hope you will benefit from all the informations and discussions shared. And this podcast is hosted by the Northeast Maritime Institute College of Maritime Science, which created the Center for Ocean Policy and Economics, COPE, this year. COPE facilitates committed maritime governments, non-government, corporate, education, science, and technology experts and partners to collaborate on developing and delivering relevant actions and impactful solutions. So today we are very happy to have many people joining us, like I said. So could you all please quickly introduce yourself and tell us also why it is important to honor female mariners. So let us start with Mr. Gordon Foote, please.
Hey, my name's Gordon. I'm a mariner of 40 years, half of which was with the Royal Navy and the submarines. The remainder 20 years I've been working in the Merchant Navy. During my time in submarines, it was an all-male environment at that time, but I learned a great many things about empathy, compassion, and leadership within working with high-tech organizational teams. And I brought some of that experience into the Merchant Navy. And although I worked through the critical infrastructure type side of discipline of the Merchant Navy, we have many females on board. And it's always an honor to have them on board. And they're treated exactly the same as every other seafarer. And for me, that means with basic human decency. Recently was the IMO International Day for Women in Maritime. So a lot of celebration. A lot of females didn't quite know how to take that, and I can guarantee a lot of males didn't know how to take that notification from the IMO. But I think if you look at all the decent people out there, they used it as a period in time to celebrate the women that are working in maritime, but also learn a few discussions around some of the taboos and some of the things that aren't right with the maritime. And we had a presentation on that evening, which opened a whole host of questions about how we could do things better. For sure, like every other industry, the maritime can do things better and better, not just for the females that join us, because they are very much a minority at just shy of 2%, according to most research, as the entirety of the seafaring population, but of course for the males as well. So some of the subjects that come up during our discussions here with my expert colleagues, so your introduction says, I'm sure we'll be talking about a few of those points, which is only right. And the more that we talk about them and raise these issues, the more we can all hope that action comes out of that. And I know that's what COPE are there to do, not just to talk, but to create some action behind it. And that's what we're doing as a collaborative collective of like-minded people from all sort of cross religion, cross nationalities, and cross disciplines. So and it's only right. So yeah, no groupthink here. We're from all corners of the planet. Thanks.
Thank you, and we're very glad to have you on this call with your experience. So let us go on with to Miss Carleen Walker, please.
Oh, hello, and thank you, Eva, for inviting me to participate in this YouTube event. And I'm delighted to see Gordon and Eric DeWicki joining us as well. I've been in love with the maritime industry since I was 3. And when I graduated from college, I went into a profession, the profession of advertising, marketing, and public relations, but I always yearned to be back in this, to get into this industry that I love. So in 92, I applied the skill set that I gained into the industry that had fascinated me all my life. When I started with a new company in 1995, 2 days after I started, I was sent to New York to a banking conference, and it was on ship finance. And I walked into the room and I was startled to realize that I was the only woman there. Afterwards, I went up to the bar that was set up in the room, and I said to the fellow next to me, whom I didn't know, I said, "Why am I the only woman in this room?" And his response to me was, "Because you're at a shipping event." Well, I didn't think that was a good enough answer. So that year I developed a program, and it was a conference held out at Kings Point, and it was called Women in Shipping, Navigating to the Top. And I gathered over 100 women from around the world, and a few men, including the man who answered my question at this banking event. And we talked about the competencies that women have in this industry, and what could we do to make it more attractive? How could we bring more women into it? Well, two of the women that were attending came over from London, and they were two of the founders of an organization called WISTA, Women's International Shipping and Trading Association. And that was the groundbreaking opportunity for WISTA USA. And then I've also been on WISTA International. WISTA in the last couple of years has gotten more active in this space, but I'm not a patient person, and I want to see more happen. In celebration of Women's International Shipping Day, that the IMO put out, I was interviewed by two different publications. One of them just wanted to know what it is that I do in the industry. And I told them, yes, I own a marketing and communications company. I'm the founder and executive director of the North American Marine Environment Protection Association. I'm the chief evolution officer for Shipping Insight, which is the fleet optimization and innovation platform for shipping. But what is important to me was the other question I was asked. I was asked by one of the journalists, what one thing could be done by this industry to make it more appealing and attractive to women? My answer is there's no one thing, but we have to start somewhere. On the shore side, we have to make sure that it's a safe environment for women, but we also have to make sure that it's flexible for them. But for when it comes to women mariners, you've got an even more unique component, which is basically the construct of being a mariner. You're at sea. And if you're not in a safe environment, then you are stuck in sea and you are vulnerable. So it behooves all of us to make sure that that environment is safe, it's equitable, and that your voice is heard. Gordon mentioned that even in the last 30 years that I've been tracking it, you could look at the 2% female mariners and say, wow, we have doubled the size, because when I came in, it was barely 1%. But 2% isn't where we need to be. Study upon study have demonstrated that having a diverse environment and fostering a diverse environment makes whatever enterprise you're working in more successful, and it makes it more beneficial to all concerned. And particularly when we're in an age where the worker is really calling the shots. If we want to attract more people into this industry, if we have to make it an environment that is safe, that is equitable, and that is accessible to all. Diversity will make our industry better. And that's the sort of thing that I think is important for us to look at.
Thank you, Carleen. And I think you're totally right. But before we go on the subject, I just want to also give the chance to Eric DeWicki to please introduce yourself.
Well, hi, Eva and Gordon and Carlene. It's nice to be with you three to talk about an important issue. I'm Eric DeWicki. I'm the president of Northeast Maritime Institute. And, I started my career in the Coast Guard Reserve. I went into boot camp at 16, and it was a pretty diverse boot camp. There were men and women. It was probably more like 5 to 10% female when I went in the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard enlisted ranks does a pretty good job of recruiting women into the enlisted ranks. And really, there's no reason we can't do that into the Merchant Marine. And as I ended my Coast Guard career and college career and went into the Merchant Marine, I actually got to sail with some really dynamite female mariners, especially navigators. And I always was in awe with the fact that female navigators were a little bit better than us, Gordon, as male navigators. And I've always attributed this to their wonderful capacity to multitask. And, no offense, men out there, but we don't multitask as well as women. It's just a fact. And big generalization, but I'm sticking with it. The reality is women make great navigators. Well, I know a couple of women who are engineers, and as a matter of fact, Miss Eva is also an engineer. So I'd love to hear from her colleagues if she was a great engineer, like the great navigators that I sailed with. But here's the deal. The industry is sailing at anywhere right now, because the statistics are not out, between a 14 and a 32% shortage between China, Ukraine, and Russia being in a hot mess right now. China with COVID, Ukraine and Russia with the Russian illegal invasion. So basically, what we have to do is look at how do we fill that gap? How do we fill the delta? Well, we've got this workforce that is capable intellectually. They are capable of working just as hard as any men out there. There's this untapped workforce out there that can fill these roles as well as any man can. And what we have to do is we have to market that in a way that says, yes, you can. If she believed, so she could. I have that plaque over my dining room table for my two daughters. And I believe in that wholeheartedly. And I'm going to tell you why I believe in that. I'm the youngest boy, 5 boys in my family, all alpha males, that my dad was away at sea for 9 months at a time. And when he came home, he was off on his yachts sailing all over the east coast of the United States. My mother, who was 5'2", whose nickname was the Warden, raised 5 boys to become very successful. And that is the power of woman. And I believe since I was a little boy that women could do anything, because I looked up to my mom and really thought, wow, that's my hero right there. And I'm telling you, she'd go out and play baseball with us and play football with us and do all the things that we would do here in the United States that our fathers would do typically. And that, from that way of growing up, I realized at a very early age that there's nothing a woman can't do. And I've told my daughters the same thing. So why not enter this wonderful field? And it's a possibility that we can increase these numbers, but we have to achieve some things first. As everybody was talking about, Carlene was talking about creating a safe environment. We at COPE have great partners all around the world working on programs and policy that is changing the way even IMO is looking at bullying, psychological safety, and SASH issues, right? We made a big splash here a couple of months ago. The fact is we're making change. Well, we cannot make change by ourselves. We have to do it through collaboration. And as Gordon said, boy, we've got folks part of these working groups from all over the world. There's probably 80, 90 people now in these working groups as a collective body of people. And if we continue that and we continue to beat the drum and provide the tools for the women to thrive in this industry, we're going to succeed. And by God, we need women in this industry just to hold us men accountable, because you do it better. You are achievers and you are successful. There's no reason you can't succeed in this industry. So thank you, Eva.
Yeah, thank you also for your kind words. And I think as a female in maritime, I can totally agree that we are capable. And I always forget to introduce myself on these podcasts, so maybe it's good to do it. But first, I want to say something which reminded me before I start, because I think the thing I always wonder about when you have this kind of sessions or honoring female mariners, or having a special day for women in maritime, or having a special day for women, well, point that out, that you are different and that you have a different gender as the majority of people in the sector. It's also kind of weird somewhere, because it's pointing you out. It's strange, and you are like a minority, and that sometimes feels a little bit strange or not fair. But on the other hand, when you shine a light on that minority, it shows you something. And I think it shows you not only, the strengths of women and all the things that the sector is currently missing out on, because I totally agree on that. That's, if you're not involving people, then you miss out on everything they can give. But also it shines a light on the things that are not only wrong for women, but also not healthy or wrong for men, or for all the genders out there, all the people out there. Because what you tend to forget, but is very, very standard, is that we are just all human, and we are all just a person in the end. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you are or where you live or what you look like. It's just that you're human, and every human deserves to have a place also on the ship, and deserves to do what, just in this case, performs their job at sea, I think. And also has to be accountable for that job and has to be responsible for the job. And I think if we can normalize that and just see ourselves as mariners as just normal people, then we are taking a great step into the right direction, into also involving more female mariners into the maritime sector, I think. So that's the first thing I thought of. And then, yes, maybe I can introduce myself as well. So I started out as a dual licensed officer back in 2006 already. So that's a long time ago. And I was very happy that the ships I sailed on were also dually focused. So the captain was working in the engine room, and the chief engineer was also working in the bridge sometimes. And that was just so wonderful, because it created like a very nice team of people. And if you had a questions about something specific, then you could just ask the team. You have a lot of knowledge if everyone is used to working everywhere. So I was really lucky to work in a company who had integrated this maritime officer system like that. And looking back, it was really special as well, but I didn't realize that at the time because it was just normal for me. So I sailed for a couple of years, and then I got kids. So then I needed to stop because I was fired because I got kids. More on that later. And then I managed to find a few jobs on shore in the maritime sector as well. So I was very happy to find that and to be able to grow and combining, having a family and kids with having a career also. So and last year I was really lucky as well to find a new job at the Maritime Registry, which is an open international flag state. And I'm so honored to just hop on these IMO meetings until then and just be able to see what happens there, and also to have a voice in there. And it's so exciting that last year we worked together with IMO and all the other member states and organizations on the resolution to find solutions for the crew change crisis, for example, which was pretty awesome to do and also very necessary. And this year we are focusing on this project in here, the COPE working group on psychological safety, bullying, and assault and harassment. And I'm so very happy that we are able to do that, because it means a lot for the people out there. And I hope it will bring them the safety that they need, that all the mariners need, but specifically also the women in maritime. So thank you all again for being on this group and sharing these discussions with me. And yeah, and also thank you for watching, by the way. So do you have anything maybe to add to this or have a remark? Otherwise, I will ask a question. I think Carleen.
I just want to point out one other thing. It's providing a safe environment is a part of what needs to be done, but creating an environment where women can find their voices and not be afraid to share their experiences, and for their experiences to be validated is very important. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing through this working group and trying to get into more of a protocol, because just to use my own experience, I was sexually assaulted at age 11. I reported it to my parents, obviously, and they didn't know what to do. They just didn't know what to do. So they told me to forget about it. Just forget it happened. Pretend it never happened. And they didn't want to report it to the police. And 3 months later, a girl was raped by the same man. And I've always carried that responsibility, because I felt that if we had reported it, then at least he wouldn't have raped her. One of the questions that was asked of me when I was 11 was, what did you do to encourage that man? And this man was 50 and I was 11. And I would to this day maintain that I didn't encourage him. That was who he was. But that's also been a part of the narrative around sexual assault and sexual harassment. I've been told, well, if you didn't have such great legs, then men wouldn't harass you. Or you must have done something for that to have occurred. I think it's important for us to treat each other with respect, particularly in professional environments, but also help validate the experiences that people have. They are their own experiences. When they share them with us, that enriches our body of knowledge about, the situations that they're addressing. So I think it's important within our industry to not only create safe places, but also create environments in which experiences can be shared and validated and heard. One thing that I have learned in my X number of years, we won't go there, is that, my daughter was treated for depression, and I learned from the therapist that part of it is if somebody doesn't feel their voice is being heard, they're going to go into depression. And that is where the work that we're doing at COPE with not blending so much, but addressing psychological issues as well as SASH is so important, because they're interrelated.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about that. And thank you for sharing that experience and your insights about that. I'm very sorry that you have to go there and experience that, but I think it's good for people to hear that you can also how that went and what that meant for you. And I think it's it's very, very, very useful to open up the conversation and have discussions about this, and not even only on what happened before, but also what happens now and what happens next. And I think it's so important to just say what you see or what you think or what you just assume sometimes, or what you feel. Yeah, exactly. And it's about exactly what you're saying, that you have a voice, and it's very important to use that, but also to be heard. And I was just this weekend talking to a ship captain, and I was telling him about our project, and he said, "Oh yeah, I have female officers as well, and I love to work with them." And he said, "Yeah, but sometimes they wear, the tops with only the small the spaghetti tops." Yeah, and I don't know, but I see the ABs looking, and I wonder, and I don't know if that's appropriate, and I just wonder, and maybe she doesn't feel safe, or maybe she does, or maybe the other people think, well, and he was just wondering that. So I just simply asked him, well, did you ask her? Well, just open up the conversation. If she feels comfortable, then there's no problem. And if the ABs and all those people around her feel comfortable, then there's no problem at all. But if they feel like weird, then it should just be able to say that, and they can have a conversation about it, not putting a stamp on somebody, or how you call it in English, not having somebody to, not label somebody, but just open up the conversation and just say it. That will probably help. So sometimes it's and seeing somebody as human then is also very important, because it's not only male, female, and all the biases around it. It's just you're just people in the end, I think. So yeah, maybe do you have some more thoughts about that? Because one of the things we talk about are behavioral norms, so that we should just have a basic standard of how we should behave on board. So I'm just curious what Gordon thinks, because Gordon is currently, of course, still working in the maritime sector. So do you have something you want to reflect on this?
Yeah, I'd just say to Carleen, thank you for sharing that with us. It's both brave, and candid, and the way you present your historical situation is termed how I feel, or how I'm feeling. What you're saying is, you had a voice, you used it, and it was not reciprocated. Nobody did anything for you. Nobody took it seriously. Nobody took the action you thought you were going to take. And when we're on the topic of psychological safety, that's the whole premise behind psychological safety, that there is a culture there for people to openly discuss topics, to have none of these taboos. And I know, we're talking internationally now, so there are still some taboos. We're not all free living, talk about everything in the whole wide world type there, from religious perspective or close, tight-knit community sort of perspectives. There's still, taboos within when you're working in an international environment. So on the ship that I'm working on, I'm working with Russians and Ukrainians and Malaysians, Belgians, Germans, British. So there's a melting pot there already from different hemispheres, different backgrounds and cultures. And don't forget, most of this culture is built around, firstly, how we were nurtured, how we were brought up as children, what our worldview is, but also from some religious aspects or the community aspects. But then also through education, how well educated we are about who we are, what we're doing, and what the rest of the world does, or how we perceive each other. So it is, shall we say, a little bit more challenging to do that in an international environment, but nonetheless, we shouldn't take the stereotype, or if you're all British, or if you're all Pakistani and you're all the same and you can all sit in the same room, there'll still be some disagreements, or people won't see eye to eye. But the maritime is international, so we have to talk from an international basis. And on my ship, when we have all those different cultures and they're explaining what psychological safety is, it is a little bit difficult to start with, because it's always taken from an HSE or a safety perspective. And in some respects, that's where it came from, because people had to openly admit to making an error, a mistake, put the switch wrong on the machinery or something, because knowing that means we can make corrective action and make the situation safe rather than hiding or blaming someone else for it, etc. And in some ways, how it comes around in a cyclic manner to etiquette, behavior, like you've mentioned there about what clothes maybe women are wearing. And of course, everyone perceives that from the male point of view, oh, she shouldn't be wearing that. Nobody should tell anyone what they should be wearing or not wearing. But of course, there are dress codes and certain etiquette. So within the norms of seafaring, if you like, and the etiquette of how to behave, how to dress, how we present, how we relate to each other is all there. But still some of the hidden agendas and the hidden taboos that are not particularly nice to talk about. And, you know, in a perfect world, none of these issues would be raised. But they happened, and they're still happening. So one way of psychological safety affecting some sort of resolution to that is allowing that open discourse, and importantly, without fear of retribution. And importantly, if there's senior people in the room where they would never even mention it, those senior leaders or that leadership that is there has to understand that situation and, where appropriate, not even be in the room, so that those conversations can take place, and then they can be cascaded either up or down to wherever it's appropriately being pointed to. And in that way, I think we can be more open about how we go about our business as the Maritime. And of course, one of the taboos was females at sea. There's been a discussion forever, and I think I could be wrong in some cases, and I do have my detractors because I speak openly about it. But some of the older white male grey-haired potbellies, that's me as well, and dinosaurs, if you like, should not be in a position where they're dictating that. So that's whether they're in a position of power, which officers as they go up in the rank will be at sea, or more importantly, recruiters from the first instance. Because let's face it, to have females working at sea, and like a lot of us are pushing for with a catchphrase rather than the 2%, let's make it 20%. How can we achieve that if we don't make it attractive for females to think this is the career I want? And as we've seen from the discussion already, being sacked because you could become pregnant, being tagged as a troublemaker, maybe if you're wearing the wrong clothes, etc., doesn't bode well for the industry. So getting over some of those taboos, some of those old-fashioned ways of thinking, is the way forward. And a lot of us are pursuing that route and bringing a lot of allies along with us. And of course, one of the subjects is allyship and how to be an ally. And sometimes it means just not sitting on the fence, actually doing something about it, not standing by while those conversations are taking place, but addressing them there and then in a psychological safe manner, to the point where there isn't a fear of losing your job, your contract, or your position on that ship, or being demoted or not being promoted because you have those views. Those views are the modern way, the right way. They should have been in the past as well. But making that corrective action, I think, is what we're doing now, cumulatively, all of us across the Maritime, and it can only be for the good. I hope that puts a point on the psychological safety side of things, and that's the way I see it. And I think it's uncomfortable about how they're being treated, whether not particularly what they're dressed as, but or what they're wearing, but if they're not being treated by fellow crew members on a ship, then they should be able to. He or she should be able to speak up and have that addressed appropriately, and psychological safety should make that happen. But it'll only happen if you have the right culture there, and of course that culture is based on trust, and that's probably the single most difficult thing to have on a ship or a shipping agency, or even in a large company, to have the trust, and that's the trust in each other to be able to speak up and say what you believe or what is right. And of course, to have somebody listen and take action if those events are adverse or inappropriate, and making sure they're corrected.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you pointed out a few very, very important things there. And allyship, I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's a very, very important one, I think, for anyone. Because if you feel like you're being heard, and if you feel like you're not alone, that's a very, very nice thing to feel. I think everybody can relate to that, right? So especially on a ship, which is an isolated environment.
I think we can all relate to that, even as children,
Yeah.
because there's very few people that weren't bullied at school. It's the nature of small children who don't have the social etiquette or the social maturity. The bullying, is what it is, and it's a power thing. So if you're taller or bigger and you're bullied at school, what's the first thing I remember when I was a child and being bullied? It was that powerlessness. You didn't have anyone else to turn to, and that was because the environment, maybe in that school or that classroom, meant that you were afraid or couldn't go to the teacher. And in adult life, is it much different? If you're powerless because you feel isolated, and then you can't go to a senior officer for whatever reason, because that culture's not there or that psychological safety, then yes, unfortunately, like you said, in the Maritime is worse because it's not like a school day where you get home and can be consoled by parents or whatever. In the Maritime, you're on a ship, and however long your contract is, you're there on that closed environment with little say in the matter if you do have those difficulties. So it's important that we have to overcome this and find corrective measures and put in place protocols so that can be corrected, and people don't suffer. And people especially don't suffer in silence.
Yeah, and in this regard, because I have another question for the panelists, but in this regard, it's what you said reminded me about something, because if you say a ship is an isolated environment, everybody understands that, but very few people really understand how it feels. But I just managed to find a nice comparison lately. So if you are working up in space, so let's say you're working in a spaceship, which also is a ship, and you're going to the moon, everybody understands that feels like isolated and a little bit scary as well, and that you're stuck in there with a small group of people. But I think it has very many similarities with the space sector and working on a spaceship as working on a merchant ship, especially when you make the big ocean crossings, because then you're in the middle of nowhere in an environment that is very hostile to you. If you fall overboard, you will probably not survive it, even if you do your best. You get trained for it, and you can be able to survive, but it's hard. Same as in space, and if you need to do maintenance on the ship, you have to do it yourself, because you cannot go to the shop. If you have a fire, you have to extinguish it yourself. If you are sick, you have to take care of yourself and your crewmates. So it's actually got a lot of similarities with a spaceship, I think. And that if you think about that, then you totally understand that you need psychological safety as well. It's normal, and to just look at the people. So, it's and the other thing,
since you brought that up, that's why usually in an intro I say I was in submarines. And in truth, although I had a relatively sort of a hybrid, different sort of childhood, and was schooled in many different areas, including inner city schools, my education through that multiculturally, where I was at school at the time, was one part of it. But on occasion, I do talk about my time in submarines. And like you related it to a spaceship, I relate it to a submarine. And I think that's where my education came from, because in fact, psychological safety was input into our naval training in the mid-80s. So if you consider that it's only a topic really that people have become familiar with and talk about, in the last 5 years, where it became more mainstream, and even in academia, they were looking at psychological safety, and of course HSE and health and safety departments were utilizing it. A lot of the military were using aspects of that culture and nature and being able to talk up, purely because of the environment they were in. So as you related it to a spaceship, it was purely the same in submarines. You couldn't go to the pub afterwards and have a drink and make friends afterwards, or you couldn't blow off steam by having a football game or a soccer game or whatever. The people you were living with, you were literally living with them in each other's pockets. And it wasn't for a week at work, or like they do, corporates have a week away, a sort of action house to blow off steam and teamwork and team build. It wasn't a week. You didn't go back to your family at the weekend. This was months months on end that you did that for. So your skill set was highly tuned to operating efficiently, from an organizational and a teamwork sort of aspect. And some of the, should we say, the psychological ways of dealing with that sort of environment can be quite alien to those that are not knowledgeable about it. So although we're not in the extremes of submarines or spaceships, a merchant vessel it is much the same. The only difference is you have got a lifeboat, or you can get away in an emergency in that time, whereas the other two you can't really. But yeah, it's only when you're in those close-knit environment where you have to rely on each other and trust each other that those real key skills come out. And I think merchant marine is gradually learning those, and we're pushing forward to make sure that they're part of not just leadership skills, but the future as well. So the cadets that come through, etc., need to learn about SASH, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Need to learn about mental health and well-being, because they're all the little blocks or the bricks that are going to go into this building, this building block that you're making to make the whole person and make them all achieve, from a team effort, working as one together. If you have the odd-shaped brick or the odd-shaped person, or they're not that well balanced or that well educated, or don't understand the intricacies of the social operation within a ship, that's where it breaks down. That's where there's problems. And if there's another bad apple somewhere, they will, as a power game, take advantage of that. And that's where we're seeing most of these situations, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad you ticked on the box of the topics of education and future perspective. Because the last question I want to ask before we end, because we're closing into the hour already, is to Eric Dewicki about what we can do in the education side. And it's like a hidden question, because we are already doing a really nice job in education and making it better. But maybe you can elaborate on that further, Eric, if you please.
Sure. Thanks, Eva and Gordon. Thank you for talking about, spaceships and submarines. So I want to start there, because education actually starts there. When you look at the education and training resources for space persons and submariners, they go through a rigorous training and education exercise. I think it's about a week from what I remember, on basically how you're going to work in your environment, live in your environment, breathe in it from a social perspective. And it's the thing that we have not really attacked in the maritime industry. And as a former military guy that, I kind of got to play around with a little bit of submarines, a little bit, just as a joyride. Not that was not my career, but I was a guest a few times. I was always amazed by the professionalism of the crews on the submarines, because they really, truly were head and shoulders above even the other parts of the military. In the case that I'm talking about, the Navy, the surface warfare Navy, and the Coast Guard surface warfare guys. And they're pretty squared away too, but there was something special there. So one of the things we might want to do, and you got the brain thinking here, Gordon, is we might want to look at those educational norms and those educational assets that exist since the 80s. And I think the other piece is, as we are transitioning educational norms into the maritime industry, we have STCW as the minimum standard that is prescribed by the member states of IMO. Every member state gets to vote on how these treaties are created, how we're training folks in STCW, and what are the minimum standards. One of the things that I really want to implore not only governments and companies and crewing agencies is that we raise the bar in advance. And so Eva, you and your group have done a wonderful thing through Dominica in Saudi Arabia and Turkey and others to basically request that IMO look at personal safety and social responsibilities. Personal safety and social responsibilities to really augment psychological safety, personal safety, bullying, and SASH. Now, I have this theory that, you know, if we just do what's right, and we put the blinders on to all the noise and the special interests, and boy, it's everywhere. It's just absolutely everywhere. Everybody's got their own agenda. They're sneaky about it, especially in this industry. We have a tendency to want to control everything. So we do everything we can because it's such a tiny industry. Not that people are ill-intended, but it's so small that everybody's holding on tight to the last group of straws. We've got to stop that stuff. And what we've got to do is collaborate and start telling the truth. Carlene told the truth today. She said, this was my experience. And boy, I'm riding with that guilt for, you know, you said it, you happened at 11, so 15 years ago. So, you know, 15 years, a decade of guilt. Can you imagine that knapsack of guilt, walking around on it and just carrying it with you? And life's not supposed to be that way. And if we only provided the tools and the assets for Carlene to be able to say, hey, this happened and it was wrong and it made me feel uncomfortable, Carlene wouldn't have 15 years of guilt. And so what we have to do is absolutely create an environment for honest, ethical, moral, sincere, empathetic dialogue. And everybody's afraid of that. I get in trouble every day of my life because I say what I'm thinking. And I'm always in trouble because I just say what's on my mind. And you know what? It sometimes hurts when I do that because I get battered when I do that. But I know if I'm doing that in order to save somebody's life or improve somebody's life, it's worth it. Gordon, you talked about folks sitting on the fence. Fence sitters allowed Nazism. Fence sitters allowed fascism. Fence sitters allowed communism. Fence sitters allowed imperialism. You know, we just all need to, in all four corners of the world, start to realize that we're all just human beings that want to be loved. We want to feed our children. We want to educate our kids. We want to care about our neighbors, and we want to really feel cared about. Those are the basics. And guess what? We don't really tap into anymore because we're so busy. We don't tap into the basics. And so we have to start educating each other that, hey, guys and ladies, we need to do this together. And bullying is genderless. Bullying is something that is usually often attributed to somebody who has been severely bullied in their lifetime. So how do we flip that situation where when we're being bullied, how are we capable of saying, you know, I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry you're feeling are hurt, or some way of flipping it to engage in a conversation and remind that person that they're important too. And they need to be heard, even if they're coming at us full steam. And these are the tools and the techniques that are really common sense stuff. It doesn't take a psychologist or a sociologist to teach us those tools. We learned it in the United States, we call it kindergarten. We learned it at the very early stages of education. But we forget those things. We really do, as we grow and we get the strains and stresses of adulthood. When you're working in this confined space, by the way, this confined community, those stresses are elevated and magnified. And boy, if somebody says something that hurts my feeling, I'm stewing on it for a week. So you have to have leadership being able to see some of those things. And in lieu of exacerbating the problem and saying, those two are fighting and arguing, which I've watched leadership on the LNG tankers that I sailed on actually facilitate this type of bullying. And it just wasn't right. And they should have been held accountable, and they should have lost their licenses, frankly, because it ended up in a fight where somebody was severely injured and they facilitated it. These are the conversations we need to have. We need to have them to stop the bullying and stop the sexual harassment. Certainly, the sexual assault is just to think that would ever occur, to me, is just beyond belief, but it clearly occurs. That stuff is to me, I won't get into it, but whomever would do that to somebody just doesn't deserve to be on any ship. We'll just leave it at that. But we need to also learn how to be human. And we have males and females on the vessel, and sometimes there's going to be relationships or attraction developed. How do you deal with that? Nobody's talking about that piece these days. We have to be real and honest about the whole spectrum of the dialogue. And if the rules say no go, it's no go. But we still have to remember we're human and we have emotions, because I saw relationships develop at sea, some good ones and some really bad ones. But how do you really ensure that people know what the rules are, when no means no, and when you don't really violate the social schema of the vessel? And these are the things we really need to talk about. It's not going to stop with just personal safety and social responsibilities being augmented to include these topics. It's going to really require us to have this conversation on a continuum. So I think this is just wonderful. I'm that bleeding heart liberal guy, man. I just want to see everybody feel comfortable in their own skin. And, as a guy that grew up in the military and played American football, and the youngest of 5 boys, I'm kind of a rugged guy, and I forget to be softer sometimes. My heart is soft, and I just want to see these things really start to happen. So thanks for including me.
Oh, yeah, thank you for sharing all that information. And I think all of the people watching can maybe take something from it or relate to it or tell other people about it. And that counts for everybody on this panel today. So thank you very much for sharing what you shared already. And we have a few minutes left. So if there's anything you want to say, then please feel free to do so. But I think we already had some really fruitful and nice discussions in here. And I thank you all so much. And I think that we just need to have this. We just need to continue to having these conversations. And I'm so glad that many people are already watching on YouTube, and it's going to be published also on YouTube and on LinkedIn and all the social media, so that people can watch it, and maybe you can write comments or you can share it with your colleagues or even bosses or other leaders, because I think we can all contribute to making change by just sharing what we have and just opening up and raise your voice. And I think that's just the best thing ever, to just be a collective and make it better. So thank you everybody for being here with us and for sharing all the information and the nice stories today. And I'm looking forward to continue this nice journey with you and also the rest of the group of the Center for Ocean Policy and Economics. And let's continue to make things better. And in the sector we also love.
Thank you
So
very much, Eva.
Thank you very much, Eva, Eric, and Carling. Yeah, it's been fantastic, and to all the listeners, all the viewers out there on the YouTube channel, you know, like Eva was saying, that it just takes a collaboration, and we can all play our part. And like Eric and myself have mentioned as well about sitting on the fence, it's easy to do. It's common sense. It's just called being a decent human being. You don't have to sit on that fence. Get off the fence. Be an ally. Let's all contribute.
yes, be nice to each other. Thank you all.
Okay,
And
thank you.
have a great rest of your day.
Thank
everybody.
you all.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.